told you, the single greatest force shaking the Asian music world to its core isn't rising from Korea, isn't rising from Japan, and it is absolutely not arriving from the West. It is rising from 5 incredibly determined Filipino men who looked at the rules and chose to burn them. Because while nearly every Asian label remains obsessed with power, rigid hierarchy, and centuries of tradition, SB19 quietly engineered a system that makes them nearly impossible to contain and completely impossible to stop. And here is the truth that keeps industry insiders awake at night. If their strategy holds and continues proving itself over time, it could rip the curtain wide open and expose just how dangerously outdated most Asian idol machines truly are. Today, we are tearing apart the strategy that most labels are genuinely too frightened to even attempt, and exactly why SB19 may have already written the proof that it works beyond any doubt. Kindly like, share, subscribe to Starwave, and make sure you stay locked in until the very end, because that final part, that is the part the industry has been desperately hoping nobody would ever dare to say out loud. Section 1. The Asian Idol System, built on control. Let's begin with the foundation that most people would rather avoid discussing. Nearly every Asian idol industry, whether we are talking about South Korea, Japan, China, is constructed on one single ruthless principle: domination. Domination over appearance, artistry, daily movements, every dollar earned, public perception, even the deepest corners of personal identity. The machine operates exactly like this. Young and hopeful trainees walk through the doors. Companies pour enormous money into shaping them. Artists launch their careers chained to long, exhausting contracts. The label holds full possession of every master recording ever created. The label steers every single creative decision made. The label reaches in and claims the heaviest portion of everything earned. Why? Because from a cold, calculated business standpoint, that structure keeps risk almost completely off the table. The company commands everything. The artist becomes nothing more than a carefully packaged product. And for years, stretching into decades, that suffocating system ruled Asia without question. Witness the unstoppable explosion of K-pop powered by empires like SM Entertainment, YG Entertainment, JYP Entertainment. It worked, extraordinarily and undeniably. But buried underneath all that glittering success lives a deeply uncomfortable problem. That entire system breathes and survives on one thing: the ability to simply replace the artist. The moment one idol walks away, another desperate trainee steps directly into that empty space. The machine never even flinches. But SB19, they never built themselves into a replaceable machine. They built something the machine was never designed to face. They built leverage, and that single decision rewrote every single rule of the game. Section 2. The moment everything changed. When SB19 first stepped into the spotlight under Show BT Philippines, they were fully submerged inside a Korean-style training reality. They endured every single layer of that grind, the rigid structure, the relentless discipline. But this is the exact moment where their story takes a turn nobody saw coming. Rather than allowing themselves to remain permanently locked and chained inside that system forever, they eventually gave birth to 1Z Entertainment. Not as a shallow vanity project, not as a desperate rebranding performance for public attention, but as a deeply intentional and calculated leap toward owning everything they had bled for. And this is the precise moment where labels across Asia began shifting nervously in their seats. Because the second artists dare to hold complete command over their own music, architect their own brand with their own bare hands, own every single decision that shapes their future, they stop being controllable assets sitting on a company's balance sheet and transform into fully breathing independent businesses. And the overwhelming majority of Asian labels, they were simply never engineered to face that reality. They were engineered purely to breed dependency and keep it alive. SB19 looked that dependency directly in the eyes and chose a different path entirely. And that is the gamble every major label prays their artists never have the courage to witness. Section 3. Control versus capital. Let's get into the real numbers behind all of this. Traditional Asian labels are built entirely on suffocating capital-heavy foundations, enormous budgets bleeding into trainee development, staggering production costs that never seem to stop climbing, international marketing expenses that drain accounts dry, massive physical distribution networks demanding constant feeding. It is extraordinarily expensive. And because every single dollar spent demands a return, companies tighten their grip and refuse to let go. But SB19 looked at that formula and flipped the entire table. They constructed something entirely different. A fanbase born and raised in the digital world. Raw and deeply personal, direct connections with every single supporter. A leaner and sharper operational structure that breathes without drowning in overhead. Multiple streams of revenue flowing without depending on any single source. Rather than growing by pouring money into infrastructure, they grew by pouring soul into loyalty. Rather than raising bigger and more expensive buildings, they raised fans whose devotion became an unbreakable fortress. And that is what makes this genuinely terrifying for the industry, because loyalty scales at a fraction of what control costs. The moment more Asian artists wake up and realize they have the power to build their fandom first with everything they have, forge an identity that cannot be manufactured or purchased, then claim ownership over every single thing they create, the balance of power doesn't just tilt, it collapses sideways entirely. And when power collapses like that, entire industries don't just worry, they panic with everything they have. Section 4. Why most labels won't try this. Let's drop the pretense and speak with complete honesty. Why do most labels refuse to ever loosen their grip on their artists? Because real autonomy tears through three things they cannot afford to lose. The profit structure they built their empires on. True ownership means artists walking away with a far greater share of what they rightfully earned. Labels watching their stranglehold over finances slowly dissolve. Company margins shrinking into territory that makes boardrooms deeply uncomfortable. That reality doesn't just sting, it terrifies them. The power to control the narrative. Inside traditional systems built on decades of calculated manipulation, the company authors the story from beginning to end. But inside SB19's world, the artists hold the pen themselves. That single shift rewires the entire psychological power dynamic in ways labels were never prepared to handle. And the danger of setting a precedent. And this one cuts the deepest of all, because if SB19 stands tall and proves beyond every shadow of doubt that management driven entirely by artists is not just possible, but powerful, independent strategy can grow and scale without corporate machinery propping it up. Asian acts can rise and compete on the global stage without ever surrendering what they own. Then something unstoppable begins to happen. Other artists scattered across Asia will start asking questions, quietly at first, then loudly, then all at once. And the one thing every major label has always feared more than failure is the moment their own artists finally start asking questions they cannot answer. Section 5. The global play. Here's what makes this entire movement even more earth-shaking than people realize. SB19 never turned their back on Asia. They wrapped their arms around it first. Rather than sprinting desperately toward Western approval the moment an opportunity appeared, they went deeper into their own roots and made their regional presence completely unshakable. That is not impatience wearing a mask of strategy. That is disciplined and calculated patience operating at the highest possible level. Because once your credibility stands like solid rock at home, globalizing stops being an act of desperation. It becomes an act of pure leverage. And that distinction separates everything. Because the traditional model that labels have always preached sounds something like burn through millions up front and pray the global market eventually responds. SB19 rejected that prayer entirely. They built undeniable proof first. They let the results speak with a voice that couldn't be argued with. Then, and only then, did they expand outward with confidence behind every single step. That isn't growth fueled by emotion or blind hope. That is strategic sequencing executed with the kind of cold precision that makes industry veterans quietly take notes. Section 6. The risk factor. Let's be completely fair and honest about this. This path they chose carries very real and very heavy risk. Without the armor of a major label standing behind them, no guaranteed spots on global playlists waiting to be handed over, no massive financial cushions softening every single step forward, no safety net stretched beneath them if everything suddenly falls. If a decision goes wrong,